Hi, everybody. It's Laurie White from the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to episode number 114 of Chamber TV. And today we are welcoming General Treasurer Seth Magaziner. How are you, General Treasurer?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Laurie. It's great to be back.
Nice to see you. And tell us a little bit about how things are going today in the General Treasurer's office. You have so much going on, and I see you out in the community constantly. Wondering what you're seeing and what you're feeling.
Yeah, well, we're busy for sure. My mission as treasurer is and has always been to do everything that I can from the treasurer's office to strengthen Rhode Island's economy and bring good jobs to our state. And that is more important now than ever with the challenges posed by the pandemic over the past year. So we've been leaning in hard into doing everything that we can from the treasurer's office to help the state economically get through this time. And we're making some good progress and some good headway. So some of the initiatives that I am most proud of from the treasurer's office are the things that we have done leading on infrastructure. We created new green finance programs at the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank that basically provide low-cost financing to cities and towns and small businesses to help them pay for renewable energy projects and energy retrofits to their buildings. Since those programs started, they've now invested $140 million across the state and created nearly 2,000 jobs, putting Rhode Islanders to work. These are green jobs, retrofitting buildings, building out solar panels, windmills, and so on. The statewide school construction initiative is also going very well. As you recall, and you were very involved in this, Laurie, a few years ago, Governor Raimondo put together a task force that I co-chaired to put together a statewide school construction plan. Every child in Rhode Island deserves schools that are safe and warm and dry and equipped for 21st century learning. And we, of course, have an opportunity to put a lot of people to work fixing our schools and building modern school buildings for the 21st century. And since that plan was approved in 2018, we have been doing very well across Rhode Island in terms of putting people to work fixing school buildings. So, already projects like the new East Providence High School are underway. There's significant renovations to the elementary schools in Smithfield, new middle school in Barrington, new elementary schools in North Providence, and a very robust pipeline of additional projects coming along from Providence to Newport to Cranston to Warwick. So we've been spending a lot of time still working with the cities and towns to develop those proposals and move those school construction projects along. But we're well on our way to the goal of investing more than $2 billion fixing school buildings across the state over the next 10 years. Aside from all of that, pension fund is still a big part of our work in the treasurer's office. I'm pleased to report that the state pension system is at an all-time high. We finished the year at nearly $9.5 billion for the first time ever. And now, of course, some of that is because we've had a strong stock market, but even relative to our peers around the country, we've outperformed. We just outperformed 87% of other large public pension funds across the country last year. It was the third year in a row that we beat the median. So I know we're going to talk about bonds and other things, but those are some of the things that are front of mind for our office, as well as a new initiative that we just launched, which I know we'll talk about, to help small businesses in Rhode Island get reunited with their missing money. So we've been busy.
Great. So thank you for offering that as some foundational context for our conversation. And you shared so much with us that I'll want to follow up with you on many of those topics. But for now, let me just say that one of the principal reasons we invited you on today was to talk about the upcoming election, where we are going to vote on a portfolio of bonds. So interesting referendum, lots of issues around infrastructure and highways, also improvements to our universities and colleges, the infrastructure there, facilities, and a whole host of things. So I wanted to get your comments specifically about the affordability of the bonds as a package relative to our overall debt ratios. So those are some of the things that we're going to want to talk about in a few minutes. But before we go there, let me just say that this is episode number 114, once again, of Chamber TV. We are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter, and we are live on YouTube. We are talking with our General Treasurer, Seth Magaziner, and Laurie White with the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce. So we welcome your comments. Anybody listening, if have a question to pose, put it in the chat box, and I will be relaying it to him. But having said all that, let me circle back, Mr. Treasurer, and ask you to talk a little bit about the special election that is coming up and your views specifically on the affordability of the overall bond package. And together we've been out there in the community talking about the need to approve all 7 of the questions on the ballot, and the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce has indeed, based on your recommendations and also the recommendations of our board, been very active in supporting the bond issues. But for the sake of our listeners and viewers who may want a little bit more information about, what this might do to the state's overall financial picture and whether or not there are any tax consequences, I wanted to bring you on to ask you to dive into that a little deeper. So over to you, take it away, and love to hear your specific thoughts on this.
Well, thank you, Laurie. But before I brought a few slides, and I hope you all will indulge me, but before we dive in, I'll just say at a high level, we need an economic recovery in Rhode Island. This past year has been very challenging for Rhode Island businesses, for Rhode Island workers, and it is in times of crisis like this that we need to go big and take bold action to spur a real lasting recovery for Rhode Island. And so we can transition to a real 21st century economy. So that's why I'm encouraging all Rhode Islanders to vote yes on all 7 of these bond measures. It's why I'm very pleased that the Providence Chamber has joined in calling for Rhode Islanders to vote yes and supporting these bonds. What I'm going to do, if it's all right, I'll take just about 10 minutes, go through quickly what these bonds are, and then spend some time answering your question directly about affordability and why these bonds are not only affordable for the state of Rhode Island, but really good investments as well. So let's dive into the slides here. Just to set the stage, this has been a absolutely devastating recession for Rhode Islanders. This is a chart that shows the number of jobs in the state, and we lost almost 100,000 jobs in about 6 weeks in the early period of the pandemic. We gained back roughly half of those jobs in the spring and early summer before the recovery flattened out. So there are still tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders that are out of work, and we desperately need a recovery. On the next slide, you'll see that this pain has been felt disproportionately by Rhode Islanders who were just barely making ends meet to begin with. This is data from an organization called Opportunity Insights. It's a group of Brown and Harvard economists, and it shows the number of jobs in Rhode Island broken out by high wage jobs in the red, middle wage jobs in the green, and low wage jobs in the blue. We've recovered and actually come out a bit ahead in terms of the number of high wage jobs in Rhode Island, which is a good thing. High wage here defined as $60,000 a year in wages or higher. But the low wage jobs in the blue line, jobs that pay $27,000 a year or less, we're still significantly behind. And I say jobs, but really these are people. These are tens of thousands of Rhode Islanders who were just barely making ends meet to begin with, whose jobs were lost and those jobs have not been regained. On the next slide, you'll see too a disproportionate impact on communities of color. This is data from the Department of Labor and Training that shows that if you were Black or Hispanic, in Rhode Island, you are significantly more likely to have applied for unemployment insurance over the past year because those communities have been particularly hard hit. So on the next slide, let's talk solutions. Bonding is a useful tool that states and cities use to fund shovel-ready projects that create jobs, that create construction jobs in the short run, but then improve our economic competitiveness and our quality of life over the long run. I will note two important points. Number one, interest rates are still near historic lows, so it is a good time to go to the bond market. We won't know the exact rate on these bonds until we go to market in a month or so. But looking at other issuers with our same credit rating, a AA tax exempt credit rating, we're seeing rates as low as 1.5% to 1.75% on 20-year bonds, which is a very good rate. The other point I just want to address is, there's a perception out there that Rhode Island is a highly indebted state. That was true in the 90s and the early 2000s. It's really not true anymore. We're closer to the middle of the pack now compared to most other states, and actually significantly below our neighboring states of Massachusetts and Connecticut by virtually every measure. So let's get into the next slide, what these bonds actually are. Question one is the Higher Education Facilities Bond, $107 million. This will build a new fine arts center at the University of Rhode Island. Significant renovation of the science building at Rhode Island College. I was actually there with President Sanchez yesterday, as well as renovations to CCRI across a number of their campuses. Question two, the Beach Clean Water and Green Bond has a number of things within it. The largest portion of it is improvements to state beaches, parks, and campgrounds, which are real drivers for the tourism and hospitality industries in Rhode Island. The second biggest is improvements to our drinking water systems. Question three is the Housing and Community Opportunity Bond, which I'm going to hold on because I have another slide on that in a minute. Question four, the Transportation Bond, primarily used to fund improvements to our roads and bridges, our critical infrastructure. Importantly, on question four, for every dollar the state spends, there's a 4-to-1 match in federal dollars. So question four, while it says 71 million, really represents an investment of more than $300 million improving the state's infrastructure. On the next slide, question five is the Early Childhood Care and Educational Capital Fund, $15 million to expand the number and the quality of early childhood facilities. Question six is the Cultural Arts and Economy Bond. The arts economy is crucial to Rhode Island's identity and has been hit especially hard by COVID-19. That's a $7 million bond. And question seven is the Industrial Facilities Infrastructure Bond, $60 million. This will do two things. One, it will make improvements to the Port of Davisville at Quonset, which among other things will help the port better accommodate the offshore wind industry, which of course is a tremendous economic opportunity for Rhode Island, good jobs in an emerging industry. And the second thing that question seven will do is create other turnkey industrial sites like Quonset around the state that will make it very easy for businesses to set up operations in Rhode Island because the utilities and the roads and everything else will already be laid out. So the one thing, just to sum up, that all of these projects, all of these seven bonds have in common is they mean jobs up front. This is all capital projects, so construction jobs up front. But then on the back end, things that will improve our economic competitiveness by making it easier and cheaper to do business in Rhode Island and improving our quality of life. So let's move to the next slide. And here we'll get into the real question that Laurie asked, which is about affordability. These bonds are affordable within state guidelines. As treasurer, I chair a board called the Public Finance Management Board that is tasked with overseeing state debt. And the PFMB, as we call it, has set 4 different limits beyond which, in normal times, state borrowing should not exceed. For example, we recommend that debt service, annual debt servicing costs, never take up more than 7% of the state's budget. We also recommend that total debt never exceed 4% of personal income. We have similar metrics for all of the state's liabilities, debt and pension and healthcare liabilities. We recommend that all of those annual servicing costs for all of our liabilities never exceed 18% of the state budget. And we recommend that the state's total liabilities never exceed 12% of personal income. And these recommendations are based on guidance from the ratings agencies and also comparing ourselves to our peer states. So on the next slide, we show where Rhode Island would fall relative to those four limits if all 7 bonds are approved. And what this shows is that for all 4 of those limits, even if all 7 bonds are approved, we would never exceed any of the 4. And in fact, we would still have the capacity for more than $2 billion of additional bonding over the next 3 election cycles while staying below those 4 limits if we chose to do so. Not necessarily advocating for $2 billion, but saying that we could do that much over the next 3 election cycles, even if all 7 of these bonds are approved while staying below our limits. So we're not maxing out the credit card here. We are borrowing within our means. And I'll just point everyone who's watching, if you don't want to take our word for it, RIPEC, the Rhode Island Public Expenditures Council, came up with a great report last week where they unequivocally stated that in their judgment, these bond proposals were affordable as well. The last thing I want to touch on, and then I'll wrap up the slides, on the next slide there, I just did want to focus on the affordable housing bond for just a moment, because we do have a real shortage of housing in the state. And I think this graph here really illustrates it. This data is from 2014 to 2019. The blue line is inflation. So over that 5-year period, inflation measured by CPIU grew by about 8%. The red line is median household income in Rhode Island, which grew by just under 20%. But the green line is the average rent on a 2-bedroom apartment in Rhode Island, according to data from Housing Works, which grew by more than 40%. So over that 5-year period, the cost of a 2-bedroom apartment in Rhode Island grew by twice as much as household income growth. And so even before COVID, we were facing a significant shortage of housing. The COVID-19 crisis has no doubt made that need even more acute. So I just wanted to pause on that for a moment, and on the next slide, just say, this is why we need this bond for housing, which includes $45 million to build new housing units and another $20 million for what's called community revitalization, which would allow communities to buy properties that have become vacant, abandoned, unsafe, and repurpose them to other uses to make communities more livable. So with that, on the next slide, I'll just sum up. This is the timeline for the election. At this point, it is likely too late to vote by mail. And so we're encouraging everyone to vote in person from here on out. Early voting is still underway through Monday. You can go on to the Secretary of State's website to find out where your community's early voting location is. And then Election Day itself is March 2nd, so this coming Tuesday. And we encourage everyone to get out and vote yes. We need an economic recovery in Rhode Island. We need some stimulus. These are good projects. And so I thank you for this platform to get the word out, and I thank the Providence Chamber for your support of these measures as well. That's it for slides. So.
Okay, great job. Yes, we couldn't agree with you more relative to the merits of the entire package. The notion of 7 questions, 1 answer, and the answer being yes. And we were particularly struck by the fact that the topics were very nicely stratified across a lot of key drivers of economic development. So whether that's the universities and colleges investing in the infrastructure there, which is so important to producing talent for our work, our businesses, and expanding the workforce. So that is, square on. Housing, you touched on that in great depth, and having affordable housing stock and stock for workers is another key driver of economic growth. And when we're out in the marketplace looking to attract businesses to Rhode Island, currently the notion of what does it cost to buy a house? And, that question does come up because if you're going to relocate a significant amount of jobs in a particular state, you want to know that so that you can build that into your metrics and your cost structure, and it's part of the evaluation. So you're really wise to key onto that. And at the press conference that we had last week, I was asked to talk about question number 7, which is the improvements at Quonset, the industrial park, and also at the ports, the Port of Davisville. And I talked about, as you wisely pointed out as well, the degree to which we're investing in those facilities. And some of those facilities haven't been touched since the 1950s. Some of the piers, where we're trying to really make the Port of Davisville really an enviable place for the import of components for offshore wind. And Rhode Island, as we all know, has really made a name for itself in being first in the country to establish an offshore wind industry. So having the proper laid out areas and being able to bring those very massive turbines into the port is really important, and it helps to fill out the supply chain. So I could talk about all of the bonds, but of course, the arts, that's an important one as well. We are really invested in arts and culture in Rhode Island. Again, a significant economic driver with Trinity Rep and the Rhode Island Philharmonic and other small grants that will go through the Rhode Island State Council of the Arts, part of that question as well. So all good stuff. And again, part of this coalition, which is 7 questions, 1 answer, and the answer is yes. So thank you for really going into the affordability equation as well, because I know a lot of folks are, really do worry about, is this going to have any impact on the state's budget? Is it going to necessitate a tax hike and the like? So really glad to hear you talk about how Rhode Island is not a highly indebted state.
That's right. And something else that people forget sometimes on that is, every year as we pay off old debt, we have old debt rolling off of our books. Last year alone, we paid off more than $200 million of principal on old bonds. So it's not like by adding this new $400 million of bonding that, our debt burden goes up by $400 million, because, we issue that in tranches over a couple of years. And then also every year old debt rolls off. Mm-hmm. So these bonding measures, particularly with the low interest rates, will not strain the state budget or tax increases.
Yeah. I did see, some commentary from folks who question, they say, hey, what about this bonding? Why are we doing it that way? Shouldn't these projects be a function of going through the legislative process and part of the, the budget itself? What would you say as an answer to that question?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. I mean, the first is all of these projects have, of course, been vetted by the legislature. They had to approve these bonds before they could go on the ballot. But, if the question is really why bond at all, again, this is something that is commonly done to spread the cost of large capital projects over multiple budget cycles to make them affordable. We're not going to be building a new science building at Rhode Island College every year. And so it makes sense to spread the cost over multiple years. This level of bonding is not something that we would do every year. It's not something that we would recommend every year. But we are in a time of crisis now. This is an unusual time we're living in, a time when, again, unemployment is high. There's tens of thousands of people out of work. It's a time when the economy needs a shot in the arm. So, if ever we were going to go big and bond more than we normally would, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, some of the other points that we were making during our joint news conference last week was the idea that likening this to like a WPA type of movement that was prevalent in the early 1900s around the Depression time. So Works Progress Administration under FDR, when there was a massive stimulus, a massive infrastructure stimulus that took place across this country to put people to work building infrastructure, individuals that were returning from the war. And this country was very impoverished at the time and facing a severe depression. So this WPA type of works program somewhat seems a bit analogous to this time. And you pointed out, at the beginning of this program that we lost 100,000 jobs in a period of 6 weeks in Rhode Island. And we all know that sort of instinctively, but when you put it like that, it's just like, wow, you're able to crystallize it in such a way that it really is a potent comment.
Yeah, I think that analogy you make to the New Deal era and the Great Depression is very apt. I mean, this is one of those historical times that we are living in that is unique, where the challenges that we're facing are grave, and times of big challenge require a big response to meet the moment. And so these are not normal times we're living in right now, and we need to rise to this moment ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I love that expression, meet the moment.
Yeah.
It sounds so poetic, and it really forces oneself to be really introspective and to think about things in context and the like. Speaking of meeting the moment, let me just ask you a little bit more about the slides that you just presented, and a couple of other things that jumped out at me that I want to follow up on. And we were talking about the state not being a heavily indebted state. We once were back in the 90s. That is not the case anymore. Wise investing. Certainly the financial markets have helped with the interest rates that are set on the bonds and the bonds that are rolling off and reinvesting of bonds. But I also want to ask you if you would agree with the notion that we're not a terribly indebted state anymore, because we've taken steps as a state to really invest in our economic development programs, in our state budgeting process that really prioritizes what it takes to be a state that's competitive, to draw people in, not just businesses, but also new residents and new workers, and to be able to position our state as really a stable place. So we've taken, as a community, as policy leaders, policy makers, some very purposeful, deliberative steps in recent years to really shore up the foundation. So do you see a correlation between those 2 points?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a few reasons that the state's debt burden has improved over time. One is that, part of the reason that we were so high in the 90s was because of the banking crisis, and the state had to issue a lot of bonds, a lot of debt, in order to make deposits whole in the banking crisis. That has all now been paid off, and that's behind us finally. But I think your larger point is just as important, which is that the state has taken some strong action, particularly over the last decade, to grow the economy. It's not just that our debt load has gone down; it's that the economy has grown, which makes a certain level of bonding more affordable because revenues have gone up and incomes have gone up. And so I'm very proud of the fact that over the last several years, Rhode Island has taken a proactive approach to economic development, rather than kind of sitting on the sidelines and hoping that things will go well. So yeah, absolutely. I think putting the bad old days of the banking crisis in the early 90s behind us is a factor. Purposefully prioritizing economic growth and growing income and wealth and revenue is a factor. And then the third factor I'd point to is strong debt management. When I took office as treasurer back in 2015, we started performing regular debt affordability studies for the first time since the 1980s. We sort of reconstituted that PFMB, that Public Finance Management Board, to now start meeting regularly again and really be proactive in managing the state's debt and making sure that we get the best rates we can, and making sure that we have limits that are thoughtful and that are frequently refreshed with new data. So it's really a combination of factors, and I think not the least of which is what you highlighted, which is a commitment to economic growth.
Mm-hmm. You are an individual of great discernment. So I would ask you, how would you position arguments around the importance of that to skeptics who don't believe necessarily that we ought to prioritize our economic development landscape? What do you think are the best arguments?
Yeah, so to me, there's a few pillars to building a real 21st century economy in Rhode Island. One is we have to continue to prioritize education and workforce training. So we need to support programs like Real Jobs Rhode Island, some of the transformations that are happening at CCRI and RIC and URI. We need to support pathways to alternative credentials, apprenticeships, and so forth, and continue to keep our eye on the ball and improving our K-12 schools. So that's sort of one big bucket, is prioritizing education and workforce, which, particularly our outgoing governor, I know Governor Raimondo, has made a focus. And so I hope we keep our eye on the ball there. A second big pillar is we have to continue to rebuild our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our ports, our school buildings. We need to make our infrastructure more resilient to the threat of climate change. So these bonds will go a long way in continuing that work. I do believe that we need an economic development approach that's proactive. We can't just pretend that by sitting on the sidelines and doing nothing, good things will happen. And so I think having a Commerce Department that's active is very important. But at the end of the day, for Rhode Island to be competitive, we have to be regionally cost competitive. We have to be nationally talent competitive, and which means, again, investing in education and training. And we have to double down on our quality of life, which is our best selling point. We have tremendous natural beauty, culture. We're a very nice place to live, and we have to continue to double down on that. And I think if we can do that, if we can stay regionally cost competitive, nationally talent competitive, and maintain our high quality of life, we can build a 21st century economy in Rhode Island that will give everyone a chance to succeed.
So true. So true. You capsulized that beautifully. Let me just follow up and ask you to weigh in on an issue that's really troubling us at the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, and that is various proposals circulating in the General Assembly at this point that would hike income taxes by 50% for some taxpayers, and wondering how you see that fitting into the overall picture of as a detriment to our business climate, because we certainly know that we've worked really hard over the course of the last decade or so to create a tax structure that truly is regionally competitive, as you point out. And we are quite fearful that an unwise approach to profiling our tax structure in a way that targets certain classes of individuals is really short-sighted and truly will be harmful to the economy.
Yeah, so I've learned that in a crisis like we are in now, where there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, we can never say never to anything. So depending on what happens with the federal stimulus bill that's working its way through Congress, Rhode Island could end up with a $500 million deficit or a $500 million surplus or somewhere in between. So I'm not going to weigh in on any specific revenue proposal until we know what the state budget actually looks like and what kind of federal support we're likely to get. But with that being said, I'll just repeat the mantra that I mentioned earlier, which is regionally cost competitive, nationally talent competitive. And so as long as we have the revenue to invest in education and workforce training and infrastructure and those things that will make our state competitive over the long run, then we should also endeavor to stay regionally cost competitive as well.
Yeah, that's a very wise way to proceed, and that's what we're looking at as well. Waiting for further guidance from the federal government relative to how the states are going to be helped in this next round of federal stimulus payments. Have you, speaking of the federal government and what's happening there, the national scene, have you spoken with Governor Gina Raimondo about her imminent departure to head commerce on a national basis, U.S. Department of Commerce? We are very, so very proud of her being selected by the president to lead this prestigious agency and organization, and we know that it's going to pay great dividends for Rhode Island to have her there.
Yeah, I have talked with her a couple of times since the appointment was announced, and I totally agree. First of all, I think she'll be terrific in the role as Commerce Secretary. I think that President Biden made a great pick, and it's certainly a source of pride for Rhode Island to have one of our own serve in the president's cabinet. And I agree with you that I think this could mean good things for Rhode Island, particularly for the offshore wind industry. The Commerce Department at the federal level has a lot of oversight over offshore wind, and so that certainly bodes well for Rhode Island. I've had the pleasure to work with Governor Raimondo closely on a number of initiatives, including the school construction initiative, which I mentioned earlier, and the infrastructure bank. And I know from that experience that she is, incredibly talented and, committed to doing the right thing and helping people. And I think she'll be terrific in the role for sure. And, we talked a little bit a couple weeks ago about, I was a similar age as her kids when my father moved to Washington to work in the Clinton administration. And so it'll be I know from firsthand experience, it'll be a great experience for her kids as well to spend some time in that environment and see what it's like. So I certainly wish her all the best.
Mm-hmm. A very large fishbowl, right? That's for sure. But
also a unique opportunity to make an impact, and I think she will in particular for Rhode Island.
Yeah. So I was just looking at some headlines, and it seems like Leader Schumer is moving towards cloture, and that the vote by the Senate may, in fact, occur early next week. And Senator Reid is also weighing in on the timing of that. And interesting to hear that they both say that Governor Raimondo enjoys bipartisan support within the Senate, United States Senate.
Yeah, no surprise, and well deserved.
Moving back to Rhode Island issues, and again thinking forward, and with the governor's imminent move to Washington, what are some of your thoughts about the incoming McKee administration, and what are some of your priorities that you intend to work on with the new governor?
Yeah, I called Lieutenant Governor McKee right away as soon as I heard that Governor Raimondo was going to be going to Washington, and I told him that I would help him however I can, and that he should not hesitate to call on me or my office if we can be helpful. Amidst all of this turnover, we are still in a crisis, right? The pandemic is still here, the economic downturn is still here, high unemployment, and so we all need to work together. Those of us who are in positions of authority need to work together to help the state recover. And the Lieutenant Governor and I have always had a good working relationship, going back to when we both took office in 2015. And I expect that we'll continue to have a good working relationship going forward.
Will you have any particular pieces of legislation that you will be advocating for in the 2021 session of the General Assembly?
Yeah, we're looking at that now. I think we will introduce several pieces of legislation. Building on some of the issues that I discussed earlier, I think there's legislation that could help expand the work of the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank to put more Rhode Islanders to work on the green jobs of the future. alternative energy jobs and energy efficiency jobs. So we're working on legislation to expand some of the programs there to put more people to work in that field. We're working on some small business ideas as well in conjunction with Representative McEntee, who's the chair of the House Small Business Committee. So we're still fleshing out the details of the legislative agenda for this year, but it will be jobs and economy focused because that is what Rhode Island needs, and it's because that is what has been my priority since the day I took office.
What about the school construction bonds? We talked a little bit about that at the top of the program, and this is another issue that the Chamber has worked very closely with your office on relative to upgrading our facilities. So there have been a couple of tranches of bond issues around school facility construction and redevelopment. Some of the oldest school buildings anywhere in the nation are here in Rhode Island. What can you tell us about how those projects are moving along?
Phenomenally, and I can tell you the whole design of the school construction initiative was one where the state would, for a temporary period of time, provide extra funding to any city or town that was doing a school construction project. And our hope was that that extra funding, albeit temporary, would spur more activity and increase the number of projects that were being done. And I have to say, so far, those numbers have exceeded our wildest hopes. The number of projects that cities and towns have brought forward that are either currently under construction or in the pipeline breaking ground soon exceeded, our highest hopes. So I mentioned some examples earlier. The East Providence High School is on its way to completion. It is an incredible facility. It'll be the largest K-12 school construction project in the state. There's a new high school plan that was just approved for Newport, a new Rogers High School in Newport. South Kingstown is currently exploring a new high school as well. Middle schools in Barrington and Lincoln, elementary schools in Smithfield and North Providence and Cranston and Warwick. The city of Providence, we've already set aside more than $300 million of funding for over 30 school buildings across Providence. Ground is going to break on most of those over the next year and a half. And we anticipate, in addition to that, $300 million more to come. So it's well underway, and you can already see the difference in a number of communities. I'd say we're in about the third inning here. So there's more work to do. Importantly, not this year, but next year in 2022, there will need to be a second school construction bond on the ballot. That was always part of the plan. So the plan originally was, a $2 billion 10-year investment in schools. The funding was supposed to come from three sources. Source one was bonding, two $250 million bonds. The first one, which was approved in 2018, the second one, which hopefully will go on the ballot next year. The second source was some money out of the state budget annually. And the third source was a municipal match. So municipalities would have some skin in the game in each of these projects as well. So that's how we've funded it. But the plan has always been for there to be a second school construction bond in 2022. And so I imagine that we'll be advocating for that, around this time next year.
Another key initiative that you are following very closely and leading is continuing to reform the state's pension system, ensuring that, in fact, those that are invested in the pension system are able to draw down on their investment appropriately upon retirement. Governor Gina Raimondo, when she was treasurer, began that process, and when you succeeded her, you in fact drove some additional measures, accountability measures, to keep the pension system strong and solvent. So I'm wondering, during this period of market growth, market resilience, and today, just some news a few moments ago that today's market, and today is February 24th, hitting record highs, all-time record highs. How does that translate into the pension reserves?
Well, the pension system is the strongest that it has been in years, and that's good news, not only for the teachers and first responders and nurses and others who rely on the pension system for their retirement security, but really for all Rhode Island taxpayers, because the better funded the pension system is, the less taxpayers are on the hook for it. So, you're right. When I took office in 2015, then Treasurer Raimondo had issued through the pension reforms. One of the first things that I worked on with her in 2015 was there were a number of lawsuits that were still active over those reforms. We were able to come to agreements with the unions and the retirees to settle those suits, to finally get all of that behind us, so that we could focus on the future. It was a deal that addressed some of the concerns that the unions had, but still retained more than 90% of the savings of the savings for taxpayers of the original pension reform. So it was a good deal. We then turned our attention to the investments. In 2016, I launched a new investment strategy for the pension fund called the Back to Basics Investment Strategy, and I'm pleased to report that it's performed very well. We just ended 2020 at an all-time high, nearly $9.5 billion in the pension fund. And not only have we performed well on an absolute basis, but we have performed well relative to our peers, other states and large cities with pension funds around the country. So last year, in fiscal year 2020, when there was significant market volatility as a result of the early days of the pandemic, in fiscal year 2020, Rhode Island outperformed 87% of other public pension funds with more than $1 billion in assets. So we outperformed 87% of our peers. And it was the third year in a row that we outperformed the median, that we performed better than a majority of our peers 3 years in a row. So we're doing well on an absolute basis. We're doing well on a relative basis. And, it's good news, again, not only for those people who are in the pension fund, those 60,000 people who depend on us for their retirement security, but really for all Rhode Island taxpayers. So we're making good progress.
Any additional legislative reforms that you see being necessary in the next decade or so to continue to tweak and make sure that, in fact, the pension system is as strong as it can potentially be?
No, I think the state pension system is on a good track, and we won't need any further reforms there. Where there is still a challenge, as you and your members are well aware, is some of the locally administered pension plans are still in rough shape, and that is a big challenge, and a challenge that needs to be dealt with. Last year, I should say in 2019, since we're in 2021 now, in 2019, we worked with the city of Central Falls for a series of changes for their pension system. We negotiated with the city and with the public safety unions in Central Falls a number of changes to improve the health of that plan. Among other things, the employees are putting in a higher contribution into the plan. They also agreed to adopt the same benefit structure as the state pension system, and they agreed to essentially turn over management of the city pension plan to our office, to the state, so that its assets could be merged together with the state plan so they could achieve lower costs and better economies of scale. And I think that Central Falls deal that we worked out a couple of years ago is a good example for what's possible. I've spent a lot of time looking at the local pension plans across the state, and everyone is different. So there isn't a single off-the-shelf solution that would work for all of them. They each, I think, will require different types of solutions. But we showed with Central Falls that it is possible to make a real difference with a troubled, locally administered pension plan. And, we're going to continue to look for opportunities to do what we can to help other communities get their systems healthier as well.
Yeah, I remember a couple of years ago, you took the leadership on trying to bring these municipalities together as part of the MERS system and be able to give them the expertise and the economies of scale and the price breaks, the price breaks that are necessary in order to prudently administer the plans.
Yeah, and I think that's still a solution that can work for many communities.
Yeah, we talk about the pension costs, unfunded liabilities, and that if we could talk about this forever, but one of the principal reasons why we need to continue to keep a watch on it because of the impact that it has on the property tax burden for our citizens, and also the property tax burden is another indicator that influences our business competitiveness and our jobs climate and our economic environment. So these are all some of the factors that go into the mix. So people say, well, how come, our business climate, no matter which, when you look at it, if it's middling, middle of the pack, or in some areas, maybe a little bit less. On the innovation index scale, we skew a little higher, but property tax burden is something that's really important to the overall equation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we mentioned RIPEC earlier. They put out those great reports every year comparing how Rhode Island stacks up relative to other states in our tax burden. And consistently what those RIPEC reports show is that the property tax is where we are the biggest outlier, right? We're not an outlier on the sales tax. We're not really an outlier on the income tax anymore. It's the property tax. And you're right. Local pensions can be a big driver of that in some communities. And by the way, it's also not fair to the workers in a lot of those communities with unsustainable pension plans. I mean, Central Falls being an example. I mean, when that community had to go through receivership, those workers took a huge haircut, much worse than, really anyone else across the state. And so it's in everybody's interest, businesses, taxpayers, workers, to find real solutions to these local pension issues. And again, I think Central Falls is a good example of people coming together 2 years ago to do that.
Well, you've done an excellent job breaking the problem down into manageable chunks and being able to explain it in a way that makes sense to folks. So thank you for your ability to translate that into real action.
Oh, and thank you again for your partnership on a range of issues, not least of which the bond. So once again, we just encourage everyone to vote yes this Tuesday. It's important.
Yeah. Before we leave, I just want to close with one piece of good news, and everybody loves good news, right? And everybody likes something that is in it for them and also a surprise. So let's end our show with you telling us a little bit about the new campaign that you have going for small businesses that might have some money that they didn't know they had waiting for them.
Yes, my favorite part of my job, unclaimed property. So for everyone who's watching at home, unclaimed property is basically missing money. It's like a statewide lost and found system for money. It could be money that was left in an old bank account. It could be money that is owed from an insurance settlement, or refunds from vendors that never made it back to the rightful owner. And a lot of that money, if it's never returned to the rightful owner, it makes it to our office, Office of the Treasurer, and it's our job to reunite people with that missing money. Since I took office in 2015, we've reunited 100,000 Rhode Islanders with more than $70 million of this missing money. Now, why this is especially relevant for this audience is a lot of people don't realize that it's not just individuals that can have unclaimed property, but also businesses that can be owed unclaimed property, that can be owed missing money. And particularly with everything that small businesses are going through this year, we really want to get the word out about this and let every Rhode Island business owner know you should go on our unclaimed property database and see if we have any missing money for you. Our goal is to reunite 1,000 Rhode Island small businesses with their missing money by the end of March. And we've been going around the state. We've been delivering checks. I was in Cranston the other day at some iconic Cranston restaurants, T's Restaurant and the Big Cheese. We were dropping off more than $4,000 of checks there. We were in Central Falls a couple days ago, dropping off checks as well. I don't drop them all off personally, but we have an automated system for that. But the website where everyone should go to see if you or your business have unclaimed property is www.findrimoney.com. Findrimoney.com. You can search yourself, you can search your business, and help us get the word out. Because once again, the goal is 1,000 businesses by the end of March to be reunited with their unclaimed property. And I thank you again for the opportunity to get the word out.
Absolutely, and I would echo that and encourage everybody to just, check it out and look and see. You might say instinctively, oh no, I don't, there's nothing there for me. But guess what? The General Treasurer a few months ago brought to our attention that the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, in fact, did have some outstanding money waiting to be found, and we were very excited about that. And I looked, and my family personally did have a small amount there too. So I can attest to the fact that it only takes a second to go on the website, check it out, and you might be surprised what you find.
Well, yes, thank you, Laurie. And I can say, in just the last few weeks, the checks that we've been able to get out to businesses, the average amount has been more than $600, but many of them have gone into the thousands and some even the tens of thousands. So it's worth taking a look.
Okay. All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground, and I really want to thank you for your time and your expertise and your ability to really dig into some of these issues and make them cogent, make them understandable, show everybody why they're important to the overall quality of life that we enjoy here, both economically and qualitatively. And you are always welcome to join us anytime that you see fit. Treasurer, Magaziner, you are a friend of the Chamber, a friend to the Chamber. And again, you and I join, and we are united in encouraging Rhode Islanders to vote yes on all 7 questions coming up in the special election on Tuesday, March 2nd, right?
That's right. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all of your tremendous work with the Chamber. We will recover, and as you said earlier, 7 questions, but 1 answer. Vote yes.
Thank you. We'll see you next time, everybody.